I knew from a very early age, when my parents and aunt, they would tell the story. They would say, okay, so-and-so has been murdered over here, and this is what happened to this family, and this family did this. And so I always knew.
Margie Burkhart finds peace and strength during her visits to Gray Horse Cemetery in northern Oklahoma. It's the final resting place for several Osage family members, including her grandmother Mollie. Notably missing here, Ernest Burkhart, her grandfather. For nearly a century, the story of Mollie and Ernest Burkhart and the deaths that surrounded her family was buried deep beneath the hollowed tribal land of the Osage people. A love story which ended in a murderous plot. That love story, one of the arcs of David Grant's best-selling book, Killers of the Flower Moon. One that inspired a movie of the same name, directed by Martin Scorsese, which shines a light on the reign of terror that struck the Osage tribe in the early 20th century. Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone play Margie's grandparents. Native film star Gladstone learned to speak Osage during her role.
That's how you are.
I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil. I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil. I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.
I want to make sure the story is told accurately. That was a concern, that there would be some distortion to the facts.
Her home and the surrounding area transformed as Scorsese's team worked with locals to bring their rich culture to the big screen. In the late 1800s, the Osage were forced off their lands by white settlers, ending up in what is now northern Oklahoma. At the time, the land was rocky, undeveloped, and undesirable. But around 1920, oil was found on the reservation. A lot of oil.
This became the oil capital of the world.
Almost overnight, Osage families like Margie's became rich, some of the wealthiest people in the world, including the great-grandfather of James Gray, a former Osage chief.
It was making national news how much wealth they were generating and what they were doing with it.
Killers of the Flower Moon focuses on the mysterious deaths of several of those affluent Osage Indians. Both James and Margie's families were targeted by the violence.
You mentioned your great-grandfather was also a victim, so you have a personal connection to this.
It couldn't be more personal, yeah. Once it became abundantly clear that nobody was investigating all the mysterious deaths that were going on, they appealed to the tribal council to petition the United States to do something about it.
Eventually, federal investigators stepped in and uncovered a larger conspiracy among non-native locals to take advantage of the Osage families and usurp their fortunes.
We weren't supposed to be wealthy, and something had to be done about it.
All of this enabled by an oppressive policy imposed on the newly rich Osage.
Half-blood or more were automatically declared non-competent, incapable of conducting business without a white guardian approving any transaction, incapable of conducting business without a white guardian approving any transaction.
What did that do to the tribe?
Well, it put the fox in charge of the hen house is what it did. And so the guardian program created an economic incentive that if this individual were to die, you could marry into this family and inherit their wealth.
Hence the reign of terror.
Exactly.
Gray was chief of the Osage Nation from 2002 to 2010. His focus, in part, was to honor the tribe's tumultuous past by revitalizing the tribe's focus on the future.
Well, we had to get the internal house in order for us to establish the kind of reforms that I knew the nation and the people of the Osage Nation wanted.
Part of Gray's plan included buying back land that was originally part of the Osage Nation and reinvesting in their communities and culture.
We opened 7 casinos, and we poured all of that money into education, higher education, healthcare, cultural preservation, language preservation.
When word got out the movie rights had been sold, Gray was committed to making sure the real story of the Osage people wasn't whitewashed.
When Scorsese decided to accept our invitation and come to meet with the Gray Horse residents in the Osage Nation, I think was unexpected. We fed him, we sat down, we visited.
Did Scorsese listen?
Yeah, he did. He jumped out of his chair and he shook my hand, he thanked me. And he said he was going to take some time to work on the script right then and there.
When this money started coming, we should have known it came with something else. When this money started coming, we should have known it came with something else.
Well, there was some concerns with some of the community members.
Okay.
That they thought this was a Scorsese film and it was going to be gory and like a shoot-'em-up film.
Margie was also consulted by the legendary filmmaker.
He said he would be sensitive.
You also had a sit-down conversation with Leonardo DiCaprio. Please tell me you got excited for that.
Maybe a little.
Okay. What was that conversation like for you?
He was real respectful. He had some questions on Mollie and Ernest's relationship. You know, Mollie, she loved her husband and she wanted to believe him. He was like, well, how could you love somebody and do this to them? He was like, well, how could you love somebody and do this to them?
Ernest Burkhart, Margie's grandfather, pled guilty to murder, one member of a much broader conspiracy masterminded by De Niro's character.
It just looks like murder. It's not supposed to be that way.
That killed an estimated 60 Osage by explosion, poison, and gunshots in order to get their hands on the oil money. More than 100 years after the Reign of Terror, Margie continues to wrestle with her family's and community's complicated history.
Was there ever a point where you said, there's a lot of baggage here, right?
It happened to my family. You can't run away from anything like that. You just have to own it, I guess.
Both Margie and Gray were invited to advance screenings. After decades of struggling with how their people have been portrayed, both agree their culture has finally come into clearer focus.
Did the movie get it right?
Back in the old days, they would miss the Indian point of view in a movie by a mile.
Right.
Now they're missing it by feet. The industry's moving closer to allowing indigenous people to tell their stories. And I think Scorsese has really set a new bar.
I saw the movie twice.
Was it hard to watch?
The first time it was pretty emotional. I mean, just because, you know, you see your grandmother on screen and you see your grandfather on screen.
What is the legacy then of the Burkhart name?
Persevering for Mollie and her sisters and for my children.
To any Osage that knows their culture, to watch this film, seeing it visibly pop on the screen, it's enormously powerful.
I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.
Killers of the Flower Moon proves how Native Americans became Europeans. Now, this is not to take away from the fact that there was heinous murders, a heinous plot, a conspiracy of murder for oil, but there is another message in this movie that explains and proves how the Native Americans became Europeans. Because there is another truth within the movie Killers of the Flower Moon that proves how the Native Americans became the Europeans. This is William Hale. He is the mastermind of the conspiracy to kill women to get their land and oil rights and life insurance proceeds. Now, we're going to do two things here to explain. First of all, we're going to explain in what order these Osage Native Americans were killed or died. And one is Minnie, the far right, was killed first by Ramsey. You'll see a picture of him later in this presentation. She was the first Osage Native American killed. The second one killed was Anna. Anna had been married to John Kinney, but had gotten divorced from him and had gotten romantically involved with Byron Buckhart, who later ended up. The third Native American Osage woman killed was Rita. Rita and her husband, Bill Smith, not exactly sure whether he was an Edomite or not. From the name, he probably is. But they were killed in a bombing of their house. They succumbed to injuries as a result of the bombing of their house. And then you have Mollie. Mollie was married to 2 Edomites. She is married to Ernest Burkhart, who had gone on to poison her in delivering medication to her for diabetes. Once he was arrested and found guilty, she later divorced him, and she later married a man by the name of John Cobb. This is a picture probably in front of one of the county buildings, and we see a whole crowd of Edomites that descended upon Osage Native American reservation because they had learned that they had oil. And you see out front 3 Native American people, 1 man and 2 women. Here's a meeting within a office of the Edomites. We have several Native American men, and as you know from the news story, these men determined that the Osage Native Americans were incompetent and they could not control their own money. They didn't have the capacity to control their own money, so they set over them Edomites to control their money and access to their money, what they could and could not do with their money. Here we see a picture of a Native American Osage woman with an Edomite woman, and it is not clear how much the Edomite women took part, if any, in the conspiracy to murder for oil. Here is a picture of Ernest Burkhart and Mollie. And we see a picture to the top left and a picture to the top right. The top right is in his old age, which is his arrest photo. And unfortunately, like many people on the planet today, we have succumbed to wanting what the Edomites have. They were given the gift of creating automobiles, and we use those automobiles today. And the Native Americans back then were so wealthy they could afford these things, and they also had persons that were, because of the laws, not every Osage Native American was considered so-called full blood. So there were some Native Americans that became servants to their own people, and you also had some of the Edomites become servants, which is probably a doorway entry into marrying some of these women for the fulfillment of the murder for oil conspiracy. Here we see a number of Osage Native American women and young girls. Notice the fringes on the garments. And again, just want to point out that you had a lot of Edomites that invaded and wanted to profit off of the Osage Native Americans by marrying with them, killing the women off, and gaining access to the land rights to the oil, and also insurance, life insurance proceeds. And this man again, William Hale, was the mastermind behind this conspiracy to kill for oil. So we're going to remind ourselves again what the scripture says in Numbers chapter 1, verses 17 to 19, about how you determine the lineage of a family, of a people. And Moses and Aaron took these men, which are expressed by their names, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the 2nd month, and they declared their pedigrees, that is, to show their lineage, to declare one's birth after their families by the house, meaning human bodies figuratively, of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward, by their polls, as the Lord Yahweh commanded Moses. So he numbered them, the Israelites, in the wilderness of Sinai. So we asked the question again, just like we did in the 1-drop rule. Why is it that 1 drop of white bloodline does not make one white or European? You see, the Europeans know the truth. but presently they control the narrative to unjustly influence the entire world. According to the Holy Bible, one father determines the pedigree, nationality, race of the children born of his seed, his sperm. Because that is the word, the Greek word used for seed. The Greek word used for seed is sperma. Now here's a picture of William Hale and Ramsey. Ramsey is the confidential informant, if you will. He received a plea agreement by telling of the conspiracy, but he's the one that killed Minnie. He, at the request of William Hale. This is outside of the jail in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The Europeans' god, their God, is gold, oil, and drugs. So again, this proves how the Native Americans became Europeans through intermarriage. All praises to Yahweh in the name of His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai HaMashiach.
He was like, well, how could you love somebody and do this to them?
I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil. Devil. I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.